This video isn't exactly a response video, it's just a comment about these women, whether they're generic YouTubers, conservatives, female coaches, and so on, who are making these anti-MGTOW videos. I'm not even going to address their arguments because honestly, they're not even worth it. It's just a bunch of ridiculous statements. There was one that someone sent me where it seems like she actually said that if a woman is married to a man and she's dissatisfied, unhappy, it's probably because that man is MGTO. A married MGTOW man? Okay, whatever. But anyway, let's go. First of all, her videos are full of shaming, right? The first argument is that one, like, oh, these guys are gay, right? Interesting. I thought the premise for someone to be homosexual would be that they're in a relationship with someone of the same sex, right? So for a guy to be gay, he'd have to be in a relationship with other guys. But actually, their argument is that these men are afraid of a serious relationship with women. Well, look, in today's cultural environment, with the toxic behavior of women nowadays, and the current marriage and paternity laws, if a guy isn't afraid of getting seriously and legally involved with a woman, he's not really right in the head, is he? And then after that, they move on to arguments like they're sexually frustrated, or have psychological issues, or problems with their mother, and so on. Anyway, it's the same old shaming. And the funny thing is, if it were any other group of men, there would probably be a video response, some kind of validation, some attention given to them. But why would a guy, MGTOW, make a video response to a woman like that? Even a guy who's not MGTOW, maybe a PUA, red pill, he wouldn't make a video response either. Why would you give validation or attention to a woman who's on the other side of the country, behind a computer screen, making little videos, you know? It doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you pay attention to a woman you have zero chance of having any kind of relationship with, even if you wanted to? Because a lot of these women are either not attractive or they're already well past their prime. Right? They're way past the phase in their lives when they were attractive or fertile. That's if any of them were ever attractive to begin with. But anyway, moving on with this topic a bit. Like I said, this video is really short. It's just because I noticed something, which is this. Then they start using other arguments, right? Then they start saying, no, that these men are probably losers, right? What does losers imply? It implies a guy who hasn't succeeded academically, professionally, or financially. And then they give away what female attraction really is, what that so-called love from women is, which is simply that attraction, that conditional love, right? Conditional, transactional, meaning the premise for a man to be attractive to them or to have any value. It's the guy who has money, who has resources, who has something to offer him. So right there, the whole thing is exposed. It's that completely utilitarian view of men, which is nothing new. In fact, that's how the game has always been. It's just that those of us born in this feminist era of the 20th century, early 21st century, we believed in this silly premise that women like men the same way men like women. Right? That her love might not be conditional. Just like a man's love isn't conditional. But anyway, any other man? Before this feminist era, he knew that. He knew that to keep a woman, he had to keep protecting and providing. But there was that bonus that divorce didn't exist back then. But anyway, moving a bit further on this topic, I've already talked about this several times here on the channel, that men have nothing to gain in a serious relationship with women nowadays. Even Dom Sandro says not to get seriously involved, not to get legally involved with a woman, because for all intents and purposes, men gain practically nothing these days. And even in other times in the past, what he gained from the relationship was less than what he was giving. So whether you like it or not, this role of the man becoming a husband, a father, has always been an arrangement where he ended up at a disadvantage for all intents and purposes. He was offering much more than he was getting in return. But even so, the man would still do it because there were some subjective values there, like having a woman, having a partner, having children. Even gaining status in society would increase as you did these things, which nowadays doesn't exist at all, right? And the other point is that the fact that the guy isn't getting legally involved, isn't becoming a husband or a father, doesn't mean that the man isn't having relationships, right? There are guys who have girlfriends but don't live together, right? There are guys who have casual relationships, you know? So that doesn't mean anything. Basically, they're just realizing that feminism wasn't worth it for them. And now we have men who don't want to become protectors and providers, or many who fell for the feminist narrative and want a partner who's their equal, a partner who has her own place and supports herself. So in this game, the ones who lost out were the women, because the vast majority of them can't compete with men physically or academically. So it's inevitable that in a free market system, they'll end up with fewer resources than men. So basically, feminism ended. Social mobility for women through relationships. That's the issue. Why? Now, I'm gonna get to the heart of why I made this video. What stands out to me most in these anti-MGTOW videos that these women are making is this. They want to keep up their own illusion, or even keep up the illusion for their channel's subscribers. And what is that illusion? First of all, the illusion that MGTOW men are a minority group, an exclusive minority of men who don't want to get married, don't want to have kids, and have problems because of that. But there's a big flaw in that logic, and that's why I say it's an illusion, because most men who already live this way, who don't want to get married or have kids, have never even heard of MGTOW, right? They don't know anything about MGTOW. They've just come to the conclusion on their own that it's not worth it and have adopted this lifestyle by themselves. Look, right now we have conservative or religious men who are living a MGTOW lifestyle because they see that women these days aren't worth it. We have left-wing men, even feminists, who are living this way too, because they see that the laws just aren't worth it. And so if they're gonna get married and have kids, they want to marry and have children with at least a woman who has as many resources as they do, or even more. We even have indifferent men who are living this lifestyle too. If I got $1 for every time a guy showed up on my channel saying he was already living this lifestyle and that it was cool to find a channel with other men living the same way, man, I'd have a ton of money to spend on PP. If you follow the channel, you already know what PP is, but anyway, moving on, let's go a little further. So there's this illusion they want to keep up for themselves and for the channel's followers that it's just a small group of men who aren't willing to be protectors and providers anymore. They don't want to become that family boss who's going to support a woman. Or they're even willing to risk having a child or children these days, even though men have no rights over their kids. The child basically just becomes a hostage when the woman decides to end the relationship and keep extracting child support from him. Because the man has no say when it comes to raising the child, let alone spending time with the child. And even beyond this issue of the guy who doesn't want to get married or have kids, there's another point too. Starting with Generation X, guys who were born around the 1970s, we saw a massive influx of women into universities and the workforce. So from that generation on, we already have men who grew up with this image of egalitarianism, of equality between men and women. So they themselves are already conditioned to refuse to get involved with a woman who doesn't have a job, with a woman who doesn't have resources, you know? They're even conditioned that when it comes to having a serious relationship with a woman, they want a woman who has as many resources as they do. Preferably even more resources than he does because he's already aware of family court laws. So just look at how many women are left out of this game. This is basically an illusion for these women who are realizing that they're in a worse situation than their mothers, worse than their grandmothers, because men are no longer willing to be providers. And now they're riding this fifth wave of feminism, demanding that men become protectors and providers, even though they weren't raised or conditioned to do that, and nowadays they don't even have the resources or opportunities to do it. So these women who make these videos and their followers are basically trying to keep up an illusion. They're simply trying to maintain the illusion that men are still predisposed to become providers. And there's still another issue beyond that. The other part of this illusion, which I've already mentioned, is that men are learning to live alone and are enjoying living alone. And they're starting to seek validation from women less and less. In many cases, they're seeking validation from other men, from friends, from their social circle, or even internal validation. And what we can see in these men, even Bill Burr made a joke about how he spent a lot of time alone. And that made him kind of an SOB, right? That guy who goes around saying the inconvenient things nobody wants to hear and he just doesn't care. So, in a way, if you look at it, men are starting to become less generous with women precisely because they don't have wives. They don't have to be generous with women. They don't have to worry about or take care of a woman. Right? We have a large and growing number of single men in society. So, one consequence of this is that people will start saying that all kinds of men are misogynistic. Not in the sense of hatred, but in the sense of not having patience with women anymore. Not having patience with femininity anymore, right? They see it as a waste of time, as immaturity, as too much emotionalism, right? This is going to increase in our society as we have more and more single men, independent men who don't have to worry about a woman, who at most only get involved with them from time to time, like for dating or even just casual relationships. So they have to keep up this illusion. And I've even mentioned before, even Pandey has said in one of his videos that as society becomes more anti-man, more misandrist, right? You're gonna start to see more and more men distancing themselves from women, distancing themselves even from the prevailing culture because of a toxic culture, an anti-man culture. And so it's not exactly that men are running away from women. No, what he wanted from women was just a bit of company, a bit of sex, and that was very easy to get. In fact, even today, it's still reasonably easy to get. Once a man gets that, fine, he enjoys it for a while, and then he starts looking for other things in his life. He starts looking for other goals. So it's not necessarily that men are running away from women or from society. He's turning back to himself, searching for what he thinks is important, and defining his own individual purpose for his life. Not what society expects, much less what women expect. And the other issue is also one that DDJ, the so-called traitor, used to say in his live streams with TFM the following. First of all, we have these anti-male laws that are completely destroying marriage and fatherhood for men. So all kinds of men will end up rejecting marriage and fatherhood. This isn't exclusive to MGTOWs. Like I said, there will be men from the right, the left, the center, and so on. All kinds of men rejecting or trying to negotiate in some way. What I meant by negotiating, looking for a woman who was on the same social, financial, and resource level as him, or even above him, to protect himself in case he gets stabbed in the back by a divorce. So a lot of women out there are gonna end up left empty-handed. Another thing is that we have an anti-man culture, right? Which, like I already said, ends up making men distance themselves from women and become misogynistic in the sense that they just don't have patience for women anymore, right? And the other issue is the toxic behavior of women nowadays, right? What DDJ used to say in his live streams is that men aren't running away from women. They're running away from dishonest and promiscuous women. Unfortunately, that's a growing group of women in society, and from what I can tell these days, it seems like it's actually the majority of women, right? So look, if you have an anti-man culture, if there are no longer any rewards or benefits for men in marriage and fatherhood, and even women themselves are no longer becoming worthy of being girlfriends, let alone wives or mothers, what is the reward for men? What incentive do they have to invest, not just in serious relationships with women, but even in dating or casual relationships, right? Like Barbarossa used to say, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. This is really becoming a reality. men have less and less incentive to get involved with women, not just socially, but even casually. And to me, it seems like that's the illusion women still want to hold on to. They want to keep up the illusion that men are still willing to be generous with women to the point of becoming providers, or even keep up the illusion that men are still just as attracted to them. Which, in my view, it seems like that's only going down.